Welcome everybody. This is a very special session that we're running today. I'm very happy to have Simon, I booked as a Western herbalist, but on our garden tour he made it clear that he does everything. But today he's the Western herbalist. Of course, I'm a Chinese medical practitioner, and we also have an Ayurvedic herbalist. So I thought the first thing we'll do is just introduce ourselves, and then we're going to go through a number of different herbs that the three traditions have in common. And we'll all say a little bit about each herb, and then we'll have a bit of a discussion about how they differ and how approaches differ. And just to make it a really interactive experience, we have made decoctions of all the herbs. And so you'll be able to taste along as we talk about them. And I brought the physical herbs here today as well that we can pass around. So without further ado, just an introduction of myself. I'm Alex Jacobs. I'm a Chinese medical practitioner, and I'm also the CEO of the Register of Chinese Herbal Medicine, who's putting on this event in conjunction with the Herbal Alliance. So I'll pass on to you, Simon.
I'm Simon, and I have been a practitioner, herbal practitioner, in Exeter down the road for 47 years. And very pleased to have been serving for that time, because being with patients is still the most important thing that I do. And I trained initially in medical sciences and then moved through into a Western herbal education. The other thing was that I was discovered by some acupuncturists and spent the 80s commuting to New York to teach what I understood about herbs to an audience of acupuncturists, and had to pretend I knew what I was talking about. And I'd already immersed myself in Chinese physiology because it made more sense than the Western physiology that I was brought up with, in terms of understanding how individuals interacted with these remedies. And if anyone's interested, I wrote a book called Out of the Earth, which was the lecture notes from those courses in the 80s. It's now called the Essential Book of Herbal Medicine, but it's still there somewhere. And then I met Sebastian Pohl and started working with him at Pucker, and had to suddenly learn very quickly about Ayurveda. And so the whole of my life is spent pretending that I knew what I was talking about. Yeah. Carries on to this day.
Well, as long as you can pretend for the next hour, that would be brilliant.
I've got very good at pretending.
Thank you, Simon. And Sashi.
Yes. Hello, I am Sashi. My actual name is Sathyavathi S. I am a doctor of Ayurveda. I trained in India. I did my graduation there, and I trained under many other very senior practitioners. And I was working there, and nature was like, no, you have to stop living in India and move to UK. So I arrived 5 years ago, and I've been working here in Bristol. And I've got another clinic in Glastonbury, and been working in both these places for the last 5 years now. And yes, doing a little bit in trying to help spread the knowledge. And Simon was mentioning this earlier, and we had this discussion about trying to help people get their own health in their own hands. So been teaching people and teaching them how to keep their health going instead of finding remedies. So that's what I've been doing. Thank you.
Well, that's perfect, because the four herbs that we've chosen, which are ones in common between all the traditions, are all ones that everyday ones people can find,
yes.
Which is perfect. And so I thought a good starting point would be ginger, because that's pretty widespread herb, and it's enormously important in Chinese culture and medicine. It's the taste of Chinese food. We think ginger is, well, that must just be what Chinese people like to eat, because they put ginger in everything. But I think that what I've learned over the years is that there's a very precise aspect of Chinese cooking, which is the same principles as the medicine. And things are chosen for effect as well as flavor, exactly in the same proportions. And so ginger is one of the most perfect things that we can put in our body from a Chinese point of view. So I'm going to be talking more of a traditional point of view, probably less on the science there. But from Chinese point of view, it's warming. It opens the stomach up to receive. It activates the digestive power of the stomach. and it tastes good, which is really great. Now, what's interesting, I've got a few samples here, and by the way, we can start dispensing the taste for everybody. There are a number of different kinds of processing that ginger goes through in Chinese medicine. Two principal ones are what we call fresh ginger, which is the ginger that everyone's familiar with, you buy from the supermarket, and dried ginger. This is dried ginger here. We can actually pass this around. You can have a smell here. It's one of those things, smells, but everyone smells and they just go, oh. It smells like ginger cookies. So,
Yes.
if you'd like to pass it around. And so I just think this is one of the beautiful things I think about Chinese medicine, is that it can be so precise. And that the ginger of Chinese medicine, fresh ginger, is thought to go to the exterior. So fresh ginger is more likely to create a sweat. And it's something that we use to have this kind of clearing function and can actually clear fluids from the stomach. Whereas the dried ginger is more of a kick-starting the engine type effect, where it actually goes to restore the real power of the body. It's interesting to compare those, that's fresh ginger effect and the dried ginger effect. Dried ginger very much goes inside. I've got one quote here, but whenever there is cold from deficiency of the stomach and the primal yang is about to be cut off, use ganjiang, which is dried ginger, to revive the yang. So I thought I'll pass over to maybe Simon first.
I was going to do the other way around.
Okay, either way.
Okay, happy
Session.
to do it. So ginger is one of my favorite herbs, spice herb. But ginger is also, so there are different names in Sanskrit for every single herb that we use. And the one for dry ginger is Vishwa Bheshaja. The name literally translates to the medicine for everything in the universe. And it literally is that. You can give it for anything and everything, and all you need is to find the vehicle to send it along with. And you can treat with just that one thing in your pocket and walk around and treat everybody with one little herb. And that's one of these beautiful ones. So Vishwa Bheshaja, as as Alex was mentioning, so dry ginger versus fresh ginger have different qualities according to Ayurvedic principles. So we would think of dry as actually being oily, and the fresh ginger is said to be drying. And if you want to have actions that are going to be quite sharp and instant, I would be using the fresh ginger sometimes. And in cases of having prolonged, deeper effect, the dry ginger works much, much better. So the properties of the two tend to have quite a lot of variabilities, but quite a lot of similarities, but small variability comes in this dryness and the oiliness of the ginger. And we can go into very many systems, but the primary effect of using dry ginger in Ayurveda is to work with ama. Ama is the condition where you've got metabolic waste. For example, you're taking carbohydrates and your body is not able to break it down into glucose, and it's stopping somewhere in between, and that's going into circulation. So that will be considered as ama. So your body can use this ginger to help break it down and process it and either chuck it out of your body or make it into glucose. So ginger is one of the best known things for conditions of ama, which almost everybody today has ama in excess. So it's one of my favorite and works because everybody's coming in with ama.
Wow.
Definition of illness. Well, the reason I wanted to come last is because, of course, for us in this part of the world, ginger is a cultural appropriation, and in a way, quite unpleasantly so, because, of course, it doesn't grow in Europe, and so the only way to get it was to go and get it from the countries where it did, and so the Europeans did that en masse, and they each had their own policy, which is basically conquest. And some were better at it than others. The Dutch were very good. They took over the whole of Indonesia. And the Brits were rather good at it too, because we took over the whole of India. Portuguese had a shot, but weren't quite so good. The Spanish decided to take a shortcut to the East Indies and bumped into America and found something else called cayenne chili. And that was another cultural appropriation that wasn't so pleasant historically. But anyway, just to make that into context, it is not part of our innate tradition. We have brought it over. But we end up using it in pretty much the same way that we find in other Asian centres. There's an interesting point here. The dry ginger is the one that we use because to make our tinctures, we use the dry, and we make it quite strong, so we don't need much of it in the mix. The fresh ginger becomes a self-care tool because that's what people can most easily use. And in a way, it's more appropriate as self-care because it's, in a way, gentler and it's got more aromatics and it's lighter in some ways. So here is another thought or two as ginger, because everything you said, I said, yeah, of course, that's what I use it for. By the way, I also use ginger as a vasodilator, so to bring heat and just diffuse it, compared with cayenne, which stirs up the heat here, like a furnace. Ginger we see is diffusing the heat to the periphery. So that's one, just that other angle I'd add. But no, the one that I would hone in on, it won't be the last time I do this, is that it makes an amazing contribution to the respiratory system as a fresh tea primarily. So all you need to do is to chop up some fresh ginger and pour hot boiling water on it, and you've got the basis of a very powerful drying, heating remedy for congested chest problems. And just like we all have asthma, many of us in this awful climate also have chest problems.
Yes.
So it becomes a natural antidote. Why do we have to go to Asia to get it? It's a good mystery, because we don't have anything like it here.
I mean, that's fascinating, everything that you both have said.
There's just one little angle I wanted to mention in regards to the respiratory system. So, I mean, there are different ways of administering herbs in the Ayurvedic system. So not just using the mouth. So you can actually put herbs in through your nose as well. And one of the remedies that I very commonly prescribe and guide people is to snort some ginger powder. And as horrible as it might sound, it's actually got such amazing effects that people can find the results within the next 1 minute of trying it.
Wow,
absolutely.
But
what's that used for? What particular?
So it can be used in a lot of ways, and as you mentioned, the olfactory lobe. So we go a bit step further behind into the pineal gland. There's a lot of theorization right now, and a lot of research going on into how it actually can work. Administering herbs through the nose.
Wow.
So it can be taken in possibly in through your nervous system, because there's a very rich lining there, through the mucosal membrane, as well as the blood vessels, because it's quite rich in all of these aspects.
Amazing.
So you're getting the results very quickly. So it can have an impact on your digestive system, on your nervous system, on the reproductive system, on your circulatory system fairly quickly. So because you mentioned that this chest is affected quite often in this country, I wanted to just mention this as well as a perspective.
Well, it touches on another principle about how ginger and chili and the other very hot red black pepper work. And the reason they're hot is not because they're actually heating. None of those actually damage the mucosa. What they do is they tickle your pain fibers, the C fibers, which transfer pain. And what you get as a sensation of heat is actually the tickling of those pain fibers. And what happens after that is a reflex from that tickling. So when you were talking about snorting it, you're also going to get a direct reflex from the irritation of the pain fibers in the mucosa. And the reason why, and we did this when we had students as slaves, we gave them capsules with ginger and cayenne in them just to see what happened when we had a thermocouple device measuring heat on the arm, and we were astonished to find that the heat went up within a minute of swallowing the spices. No way could the spices have got there, but they were already irritating those fibers, and we were getting the reflex effect in terms of circulation. So you're almost certainly going to get that in big time with the snorting.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's it's really fascinating. I knew we'd go in different directions. I had no idea we were going to get to snorting ginger, but you learn something new. But it's so interesting that these temperature modulating properties and respiratory modulating properties. If you look at a lot of respiratory formulas in Chinese medicine, they'll have many of them will have ginger in them. But then the way the Chinese think about it, they think a lot about whether something's affecting the interior of the body or the exterior, and the exterior is very much to do with sweating. There's this idea that ginger can move, it can clear fluids that are sitting on the stomach because it can move them out towards the exterior for a sweat. This is the way that the Chinese logic works. But we all know this feeling of if you drink a warm, even just with no ginger, you just drink a warm soup, you break out in a little sweat. There's almost some kind of steam that builds up in the body. That's how it will feel subjectively. But if you put ginger in, it's going to promote that feeling. And what's interesting about it is, yes, it can raise the temperature, but we can also use that mechanism to bring the fever down. Because if you're not sweating and you've got a fever, it can promote a sweat and bring fever down, which is
fever management.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah, fantastic. So, and just the other thing that you mentioned about dryness, it's interesting when there seem to be contradictions between the systems, or maybe they're not. You were talking about how you saw the dry ginger as more lubricating and the fresh ginger as drying. If I was to leap to an explanation from the Chinese system, because we would say that the dry ginger, I think, is inherently more drying. However, because it activates the body's fundamental metabolic warmth, which we would call yang, it can restore the abilities of the body to kind of distribute the fluids around the body. Whereas fresh ginger, because we see it to push the fluids out to the exterior, it can dry the interior because you're pushing the fluids away. I know it's a completely different way of describing it, but it's kind of interesting that you could have that same conclusion.
True.
Brilliant. Well, let's move on to the next one, which it is a bit ironic that it's a very warm day and we're doing all the hottest herbs, but we're going to move on to cinnamon, which again comes in classically in Chinese medicine in two forms. So we'll distribute some cinnamon in our cup. So we call this one guizhi, which is cinnamon twig, and this one is ro gui, which is cinnamon bark. And the Chinese have this principle, which I'm be interested to hear from all the other traditions, that the part of the plant often affects the same part of our bodies. So the twigs affect our twigs, our fingers are our extremities. So it goes again out to the exterior of the body. And then the bark affects our trunk. So it affects more internally. And that's one of the principles that we have. But they really do work that way. In Chinese medicine, we classify things by temperature and then flavor. So this is variably either warm or hot, and it's also acrid and sweet, or spicy and sweet. It can boost the warmth of the body just like ginger, although cinnamon has this amazing ability to unblock the flow of circulation throughout the body, which is why it's one of the most key ones we use for pain. Cinnamon's absolutely fantastic for pain, but particularly pain from our perspective when there is cold congealing the blood. We say it really goes to the blood of the body. Again, one of the great things about cinnamon is it tastes great. I remember I was giving some cinnamon to my Tai Chi students to get their blood, their chi flowing when they're doing their practice. And I said, it has natural sweetness in it. There's no sugar in it, but it's just sweet. And then I looked online and I found there is actually sugar, a little bit of sugar in cinnamon. So I was just like, and that's, cinnamon, ginger often get paired in Chinese medicine. And they often get paired in the culinary way as well, which is really, really nice. So you can add some cinnamon and ginger to your porridge in the morning. It's so easy, and you can bring that warmth in. it's really nice that all three traditions use cinnamon because and ginger because they're so fundamental to Chinese medicine. If you asked me to pick two of the most core herbs, it would probably be cinnamon and ginger. But with that, I will pass on to Sashi, and we can pass these around. Yes.
Is this one in twig or bark?
So twig.
So cinnamon, as I mentioned earlier, every herb has got many names based on maybe how it looks or maybe what its properties are or what it can have. So cinnamon, one of the names, the primary name is tuak, which literally means skin. So cinnamon also has another name which is called as sthira. Sthira means stable. So cinnamon is often used to stabilize the digestive system. So it brings in the stability, the word sthira. So I would often think of using cinnamon for people, say, who have motion sickness, because it's an instability and the digestive system feels that instability in there. So the stability for the digestive system can be often found when we use cinnamon, and understood in that way. Now, there are different perspectives of course, there are very many similarities, like he said, about the flavors and taste. And we look at Ayurveda in the terms of elements, and that can be called as doshas. So elements are quite easier to understand. So I would, use the word elements. So elements, based on the fire, air, water, earth, space, etc. And in that perspective, we have got the same understanding as to is it a warming or a cooling. So it is definitely warming according to Ayurveda as well. And it is also said to have the sweetness about it. So although it is warming, because of the sweetness, it does not tend to affect the fiery nature of people. So some people tend to have more heat in their bodies. So it doesn't tend to affect that because of the sweetness in it. So it tends to get tolerated fairly well. But that we have to be quite careful in not giving too much for people who we would assess as having too much heat in their bodies. Apart from that, cinnamon can also be understood as being it's quite easily used in the respiratory system. And one very famous, commonly used formula is called Sitopaladi Churnam, and one of the main ingredients there is cinnamon in there. It's quite simple to make up, and you mix them all up together, and use honey along with it, and that's it. The person starts to cough up mucus, and they're actually eliminating. It's kind of an expectorant. So cinnamon has that kind of a property as well. And I'm just trying to think what else can I add here. I will let you speak, Simon.
Another cultural appropriation, of course, but this one, slightly interesting story, because cinnamon actually came to Europe a very, very long time ago. So it was long before the colonial expansion. And it was Arab traders that were responsible for bringing it to the early Greek and Roman Europe. And they made these perilous journeys around the edges of the Arabic Sea. And there was quite a business and industry in bringing cinnamon into Europe that way. But to protect their heritage and their property, they created these extraordinary stories about cinnamon, and that to get it, they had to climb mountains to rescue it from the nests of big birds called rocs, who defended the nest with great viciousness, and people died in trying to retrieve this precious stuff. You can see the storyline building. So cinnamon always had this slightly magical quality when it came over here. We, of course, started using the Indian and the Sri Lankan cinnamon, which is different from the one you've got there, which is cassia, cinnamon cassia. Cinnamon is Ailanicum, cinnamon bell rota, which is the Indian one, and they're different. So the one that I actually use is Sri Lankan in the practice, and it's got less of a punch to it, but it has more aromatics to it. The one that people buy in the stores is Indonesian, often, sometimes Indian, very rarely is it Sri Lankan. Occasionally you get cassia coming in, and you can tell by the quills. The quills, as you see, the cassia quills are very firm quills. If you get a proper Zeylanicum, it's very crowded, lots of mini quills inside, so it's very dense quill oil form, and the smell is more aromatic. That's the one that I use. It's interesting how people connect things with their impact, as I was saying earlier. So the obvious point about cinnamon is that it's both hot and sweet. That's quite exciting, isn't it, in its own right, to have something that's both. And it's not just the sugar, the cinnamaldehyde actually is naturally sweet. So it is a genuine sweetness that is not sugar-based, but it allowed people to think about sugar and sweetness. And everyone knew what diabetes was. I knew what diarrhea was too. Diabetes was what happened when your urine tasted sweet, and it was a killer. So people with diabetes would die quite quickly. It was a wasting disease before they found insulin. And so the connection between cinnamon and blood sugar grew from an early point. And now we've got mixed messages from the research, because it probably isn't that good at managing blood sugar levels. But it seems that if you get into the diabetics phase, it helps to reduce the impact of blood sugar hits on the body. And I think it's got a lot going for it in terms of the stabilizing effect, particularly in relation to our modern diets. So I would just throw that in as another cinnamon unique feature. But I've been biting my lip all the time, because of course the most wonderful angelic alliance ever is between cinnamon and ginger. And it is something that anybody can do at home. And this is the way I talk about it with people who are new to all this. And I said it's anti-cold. And we all know what cold feels like. It often comes in, as we used to say, through the kidneys. So one of the first things you notice is that there's a draft somewhere. So nobody else seems to be noticing, but I'm going to tuck my shirt in because I'm feeling the cold up here, aren't I? And then you get that feeling up here that you think is going to be associated with a cold, common cold, nice term. And it's at that point that you can turn things around with a simple cinnamon and ginger tea. Grated ginger, powdered cinnamon, make as a tea, get a thermos flask and requisition it for this purpose, because you want to make enough of it to be able to sip it through the day. Any cold, joints, chest, headaches, gut, menstrual. We haven't talked about menstrual yet, because both of these, all of these ones we're going to talk about this afternoon have a menstrual reputation. And it's the one where the woman has to put a hot water bottle on her tummy. It's cold. Anything that's made worse with cold, this is an instant antidote. And again, we're sort of banging our head thinking, how do we not have anything like that here?
Yeah, it's amazing. Just talking about heat and cold reveals some kind of gap in our modern thinking.
But most people get it.
Yeah.
And when you get them away from the medievalisms, they can understand what cold feels like.
100%. I mean, it's the stabilizing thing is quite interesting, both of you, because I
It's also a convalescent remedy, isn't it?
Yes.
For building strength when you're repairing. I was going to say that as well. Sorry.
No, that's okay. My experience with giving it to people is it rarely makes people feel too hot. If I'm just giving a little bit like now, if we had this decoction here, because I think it spreads things around. So it heats, but it actually spreads things around so things don't build up. Whereas I think dried ginger could spike that heat in the body.
Yeah, I was just also mentioning about the cinnamon. The Indian way of cooking is often I'm not sure about many other Asian systems, but then at least the Indian way of cooking is where you are infusing these spices into fats.
Yes,
so
exactly
the cinnamon, etc., is often cooked in the fat.
And the fat first.
And that makes a difference. It makes it a bit less, intense. Yeah. So if you were to sprinkle a lot of cinnamon into your food directly, it's going to be a lot more intense compared to cooking it with fats.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that will make a difference. So that's why a lot of people can't tolerate too much cinnamon sprinkled on their food.
And I think this is going to be a theme because the preparation methods, are quite interesting. You've got Indian cooking infusing into oils and fats.
Yeah.
It does happen a bit in Chinese cooking too, but the decoction is the primary way that we deliver our herbs, whereas you've got tinctures in Western herbal medicine, and particularly when we come to turmeric, we're going to see that there are some differences, with what comes out of the herbs when we go there. But just in interest of time, we'll move on to the next one, which is fennel seed, which I love. Do you want to pass it over? The immediate aroma, this one. And I actually first came across this not from Chinese medicine, but from a couple of months I spent living in India. And you would get given a handful of this after a meal to eat. So sorry if I stole that. What you were going to say, Sashi.
That's all right.
But so I already knew it as this beautiful digestive, amazing. But so I was very curious to see what it does in Chinese medicine. And in Chinese medicine, it's very much within this moving aspect of with the aromatics. They move fluids, and so it can be used for pain. It's got a warming characteristic to it, and it treats chronic pelvic pain, which is a really key aspect of it. I think it's quite gentle, but it's quite effective. The name of it is called Hui Xiang, which Hui means return and Xiang means fragrance. And as I mentioned in the garden earlier, that it's actually called Xiao Hui Xiang, which is small, return the fragrance. And there's a famous doctor called Sun Si Miao, and he said that when you boiling rank meat, you add a bit, and the rank odor disappears, and you add it powdered to bad smelling sauce, and it becomes aromatic again. Thus, it's called return the fragrance. So it's already got a food relationship to it, and it's something that is used to can be used a little bit to disperse the cold in the body too, and it's got an affiliation with the small intestine as well, of moving qi in the small intestine. So I'll pass on to Sashi.
Thank you. So yes, like you just mentioned earlier, fennel is something that is a very common part of Indian households, where it is literally there sitting on the dining table or on the counter, where you would have toasted fennel seeds that you can just put in your mouth after a meal, and it acts as a digestive. So the primary use of fennel is considered in the digestive system. So fennel is often used to help, say bloating, wind, because it tends to be warming slightly. Slightly, I say, because there are different schools of thought. Some of them believe it's actually cooling, but some of them believe it's warm. And in my experience so far, I've felt that it is slightly warm. It's not very warm or it's not cold. So it's slightly warming, and because of that warming effect, it tends to have a good balance on the wind element, the air. So it because air is cool in nature, you would like the warmth to balance it out. So you have that from the fennel seeds. Fennel seeds are, like you mentioned earlier, have a very important aspect in the reproductive system, in the menstrual system. But interestingly, fennel is also said to be something that works very well for the brain. It's said to be something that helps your yes.
We're going to snort it again now.
No, not the fennel. No, I've not been doing that. But fennel is said to be quite good for the brain, to help in the memory. It's said to be, making you quite brilliant. So fennel is said to be used in that perspective as well. And something that I would suggest people to have is just chew a few toasted fennel seeds, and that's something that you can have regularly. Yeah.
That's so interesting. We associate aromatics with moving qi and fluids in Chinese medicine, and we also associate, slowness in mental functioning sometimes with a build-up of, stagnation or stuckness. So that literally decongesting of
Yes.
the mind, of the head. You know, that can correlate. That's interesting. So
And this is one of ours, thank God. We got one. Not very many of these warming remedies and kitchen remedies. Well, we've got a few kitchen remedies, but that's one of the actual brown top spices you buy in supermarkets, which actually can grow here and does grow here. And it was already well characterized in the early herbals. Galen called it a remedy hot in the first, sometimes second degree. So it was just as you were saying, it's warm but not too hot. And that related to its role in fever management, because what you're looking for is something that will support the natural heat and fever and not take it too far. So that was one of its early uses. But yes, primarily for the digestion. I think Parkinson said something about, I'm trying to recall, something about helping to move the phlegm from meat and fish if it wasn't good, something like that. So it was clearly seen as something to help with digesting food, particularly rich food. Its other well-known properties we touched on before was in the lower part of the gut, and in fact I remember reading the Barefoot Doctor Manual from China, where they were talking about barefoot doctors, the people out in the communes away from hospitals and so on, who had to deal with emergency situations, and for emergency acute abdomen problems that would normally require an appendectomy or something, they would recommend horrific amount of fennel, basically, heroic doses. I'm trying to remember the dosage, but it was a lot, and that would save an acute abdomen. I don't do this at home, but it's definitely, there's a long link with the gut, and of course the obvious, relatively recent tradition is in colic water for babies, for infants, because fennel and dill were the two ingredients of colic water for nursing babies, and they've stopped doing it. I'm sorry they have, but modern midwifery is a bit risk averse, so they don't recommend it anymore. But it's still a very good home remedy. You can make your own for griping. Gripe water. Yeah, that's the word. Gripe water. Yeah, that's the word I was trying to think. Colic water. Gripe water. So the tradition of settling gas and so on lower down, and that of course brings us to the whole pelvic role. And again, it's a long-standing women's remedy, used by women in this part of the world a lot for their self-care as women among each other. The best source of herbal lore is women in tradition, of course. And yes, and nursing mothers would quaff the stuff because it would help produce more milk.
Oh yes, that
And
is.
so do cattle. If you need to bump up your milk production, you give fennel seed in their feed. So there's a sort of a hormonal quality about what it's doing, which of course, like many things, we don't understand.
yeah, amazing. So we have fennel here. India has fennel natively.
Yes,
Yes.
I think
As well?
it's all across the
Yes.
whole of the northern hemisphere.
Really,
Mhm.
that's really fascinating.
'Cause
So
it
this is not
spreads so
something
easily.
that's travelled by
No,
people
no, I
trading
think
it. It's travelling.
travel itself, and it's even in Western, at least Midwestern North America, that might have been brought over by the settlers, but it's certainly rampant over there, because once it grows,
I mean, I think that innately makes it kind of special,
Yeah.
doesn't it? Because we think of, say, ginger as coming from a certain place, or cinnamon coming from a certain place. But
fennel is in
fennel's-
every person.
Yeah,
Mm.
that's so interesting. And also that was it Galen who also had the idea about returning the fragrance. So it was the
If in doubt, Galen said it, and then you're safe.
He didn't see it from the Chinese. Is what
I
you're
mean,
saying.
just as an aside, you've got well-established written down traditions. Ayurveda has. We cut Galen off at his knees about 500 years ago. Before that, all Western medicine was Galenic. It still is in Islam, by the way, because the Islamic physicians 1100s, adopted Galen as their master, and some of the other Greek physicians as well, and brought it up to date. And it's still being taught in Al Akbar University and so on in Islamic countries generally. But we lost it, and we actually got rid of most of his writings somewhere along the line. He's supposed to have written 500 books, but 5 or 6 of them survive, and most of them are in German, translated to German, because they didn't lose their respect for him. But to get a solid Galenic source is actually quite challenging.
Oh.
So we've got Culpeper copied him, various others copied him, so we've got sort of second-hand accounts of Galen, Seth. But we don't have that straight hand-on connection.
I was just thinking about the 3 herbs that we've had so far. They do have something in common, is they're all used in mulled wine and glühwein. And it's one thing that I like to highlight to people, because we talk about heating and cooling, and this is something that for some reason is a strange concept to your average person in the West. If you say, oh, everything has a heating or cooling property, then you point out that all these herbs are used in mulled wine. And when do we have mulled wine? We have mulled wine when it's cold. So that knowledge was there, so we do have a heritage with it. Yeah. So moving on to our final one.
Which you don't put in mulled wine.
Well, yeah, and you don't have to put the wine in mulled wine. It's a very nice drink without it. If you want to pass the turmeric, I haven't got it it's just in the packet here. Have a nice little
That's it. Yeah.
smell there. It's take out a couple of pieces. So, as we can see, turmeric is yellow, and the turmeric is in Chinese is jianghua, which is yellow ginger, which translates to yellow ginger. So, turmeric is an interesting one. I think it is, it definitely is a late addition to the Chinese materia medica. And it's something that I think was imported, I guess, from, would it be from India or Middle East?
India, the rainforests particularly of India.
Yeah. In Chinese medicine, it is acrid or spicy, bitter, and warm, which is, I always found interesting, because you just have to Google turmeric, and it will say turmeric is an anti-inflammatory. So we then think, well, shouldn't it be cooling if it's an anti-inflammatory? If there's evidence, say, anti-inflammatory. Now, there are all sorts of different ways we can approach this, and we've already talked about how you process it. So the Chinese usually put it into a decoction. They boil it. But obviously you can put it in food. I understand it's fairly common in Indian cooking.
Fairly common, yes.
And of course you can put it in a tincture. So I'll leave those discussions till later. But one thing I would say is, I think even in the Chinese approach, it does qualify as being anti-inflammatory because of what it does and where it goes. So the spicy flavor moves. And it's spicy and aromatic, so it moves the fluids and it moves the blood. What's interesting about it is it's bitter, and that bitterness takes that action deeper. Because the bitterness moves a little bit inward, so it's got this function in a sense of going deeper into the blood vessels, warming and moving. And in Chinese medicine, we say when there is free-flowing qi and fluids, there is no pain, and where there's not free-flowing qi and fluids, there is pain. So when we can get that movement free-flowing in the body, it can relieve pain, and of course, if you're relieving pain, that's part of inflammation. And also, if you have blockage, that can cause heat to build up. If you remove the blockage, it can cause heat to come down. So again, it's a little bit like ginger in the sense that you can bring down a fever with ginger. Ginger is warming in its property, but it can provoke a reaction in the body like a sweat to bring the fever down. Turmeric can unblock the flow, and if it's the blocked flow that's causing pain and heat, then it is anti-inflammatory. So that's the interesting thing with it. But I'll pass on to you, Sashi.
So earlier I mentioned about how it's not always orally administered. You can administer through different forms and ways. Turmeric is something that's administered through the skin. Quite commonly, Indian women would shower, at least until a few decades ago, they would shower regularly with turmeric on their skin. It was said to beautify the skin. One of the most potent ways of for helping the skin is said to be through turmeric. So something that is used on a regular basis is for the skin. So the primary aspect of turmeric actually is in the skin. And it's not very uncommon where in the olden days, if there's a nick or a cut or a wound or something like that, elders would just, grab a little portion of turmeric and dab it on top of the wound and would say that this will help in the healing. So it would be quite, and that often would be because of the bitterness in it. And so it helps in wound healing. So it's quite good for the skin. It helps in wound healing. And it is, of course, definitely quite anti-inflammatory. So it is used in a lot of inflammatory situations. These herbs, each of them that we've been discussing, they've got many, many directions that they flow in. But then I've been just trying to point out the most, commonly seen areas. And one of the ways that turmeric can get used in Ayurveda is for diabetes. And there's a very common combination, which is Indian gooseberry along with turmeric. It's a very common prescription. It's called as Dhatri Nisha. And these two are often given together for helping in the pancreatic functioning. So it has, because of its bitterness, that's why it tends to get used in the cooking every day, because Ayurveda looks at a balance of all the flavors in your everyday meals. So you want to infuse bitterness and you don't want to infuse too much of it. So they would put that in the form of spices. So spices are the sources of bitterness in your cooking. So turmeric happens to be one of them. But then what does happen is that I found that when I would order something, in a restaurant or a cafe, once it did happen that I ordered something with turmeric in it, and they put maybe a good couple of tablespoons of turmeric, and it can be nauseating. So turmeric is quite commonly known to, excess of it can actually cause that reflex. So the other area where turmeric is quite often used is the respiratory system, turmeric lattes. So turmeric latte is nothing but a regular everyday drink in India, where you would have some turmeric and hot milk. That's it, not even anything else. So just turmeric and hot milk with some pepper. If you've got a cold, is going to be something that your parents would come and hand in your mouth, and kids would, of course, always not want to do it. But it's very, very good for the respiratory system. You can have turmeric with honey as a lick for the respiratory system. And you can also use turmeric in the form of gargles. So again, bypassing the digestive system. So if you want to clear a sore throat, having a turmeric and salt gargle is another way of helping because it's also very good in fighting infections. So it can be used in that aspect as well. So just some common ways of using turmeric here.
So interesting. Would there be a difference then in decocting turmeric in milk in terms of what's actually extracted? Because there's some fats in milk. Yeah. That's very interesting. Yeah.
Well, there's a disadvantage here because we're getting to the end of the day, and at Pucker I was called Mr. Turmeric, and I have a turmeric-coloured waistcoat which I put on for show when I'm standing on my hind legs and talking about turmeric, and I can talk about turmeric without repetition for a week, I think. So you're at a disadvantage. I mean, there's so much, apart from the fact it is. I mean, the average Indian, someone calculated, eats 2 to 5 grams of turmeric a day because it's in all the food. So to put it simply, we may be turmeric deficient, particularly given that the impact of turmeric systemically almost perfectly fits the modern needs. The anti-inflammatory thing is a good one because one of our principles is that inflammation is the body, like fever, is the body defending itself by throwing heat at something, joint or whatever, to get rid of the cold in the joint. And one of the oldest ways of treating arthritic joints, for example, was to put heat on, to put, whether it was nettle rash or whether it was cayenne powder or whatever it was. The point was you heat it so that you can help the body to do the inflammatory defense quicker and with less harm to the joint. the same. So the principle of using heat to help the body with an inflammatory problem is perfectly okay in that sense. We're totally happy with that. It doesn't have to be cooling to do it. We just need to have something to help the inflammatory process. How it works is, of course, getting everyone more hot and bothered because everyone puts their faith in one of its constituents called curcumin, which is the yellow pigment. And if you go and find turmeric supplement range, you'll find everyone outdoing themselves on how much curcumin they can deliver. And my curcumin is better absorbed than yours. And I'm going to put black pepper in to make it even more absorbed. Well, here's the thing. Curcumin probably gets 1 or 2% absorbed. 98% at least stays in the gut. If you add black pepper, you'll double, perhaps, your absorption. So it might go from 1 to 2% to 2 to 4%, which is just as well, because curcumin is toxic. You mentioned overdosing it, but curcumin is toxic. If you injected it or whatever, it would harm you. So there's a reason why it's not absorbed. So why do we value it? And the answer, Martin, we're pleased to know, almost certainly involves its effect on the microbiome. And to cut a very long and extremely interesting story short, curcumin seems to engage in a conversation, but what we call crosstalk, between the microbes and the gut wall, and they're constantly in communication because that's how they live together. And there's a conversation sometimes can go wrong. Curcumin seems to somehow, you may think I'm making this up, and yes I am, but it's making 2 and 2 and adding them to make 4.5. That's as much as I can say, but it's looking as though there is an effect on the biota, the microbiota, which reduces the absorption of what Martin was talking about earlier, the lipopolysaccharides. And frankly, most of the inflammatory effects in our lives comes from AMA, the congestion that we inherently get by eating crap food, and too much of it. And we get a build-up of essentially these lipopolysaccharides being generated and absorbed, and the inflammatory levels in the blood just rise accordingly. And if you can cut those inputs from source, you've got a very exciting project here, haven't you? The only problem with turmeric is that it's yellow, and I don't use it as a tincture because it would make everything messy. And if they're making turmeric products industrially, they have to do it in a separate annex, and the workers have to put spacesuits on because they come out yellow. It's just everywhere is yellow. It's an absolute nightmare. So the best way of taking it is either in cooking, but to be just to the tradition, you need to have your curries for breakfast, like you do in India, and or you go and get a supplement which you can swallow, because what you're also looking for is something that will give you a reasonable, say, find a good extract of turmeric. Forget the curcumin story. Curcumin's better where it belongs, in the gut. Anyway, I managed to do that in 5 minutes.
That's amazing. This conversation's been absolutely fantastic.
Yes.
So thank you, both of you. I think it's a really rare opportunity that we get to talk to each other about different traditions.
Yes.
But one thing that is incredibly special about herbal medicine practice is really the traditions that we hold and the high level of practice that we continue, and to each of us devoted in our own lines to be able to bring that high level of practice out and have a conversation about it, and to learn from each other. I think it's a very special opportunity. So thanks everybody.
Thank you.